Hi, this is a tropical update for the early morning hours of September 12th. The opinions in this video are mine and mine alone, and always consult with the National Hurricane Center for official forecasts and details. Well, we're pretty much wrapping up with what was Category 5 Hurricane Irma in the Atlantic that made landfall on the Florida Peninsula and in the Keys on Sunday, bringing with it a lot of power outages with it and a lot of wind damage as it went up the spine of Florida and now is pretty much situated over the southeast United States. Still has some embedded strong bands with it, with some thunderstorms and occasional tornadoes with it as these things spin up. But pretty much this thing is almost winded down into a remnant low at this point. Still has a pretty good amount of rain with it on the northern side and the western side of it, but this thing will pretty much start fading away and will just be a rainmaker for the next few days before it kicks out to sea in the northeast effects. So moving on to what is the next big player in town is going to be Hurricane Jose. Kind of has been a shell of its former self, but over the last few hours or so, you can see a big burst of convection right around the center. But what has kind of been hampering it over the last 24 hours to 48 hours compared to what it once was as a Category 4 hurricane has been the massive outflow from Irma, shearing this thing from north to south and pushing all the convection on its southern side. So you can kind of see that from the microwave imagery pass from September 11th on the early afternoon hours. You can see it's got a lot of dry air got sucked into it on the eastern side, the northern side of this thing. So all the convection around the center has now been pushed to the south. So all the core winds are pretty much just in this very tiny area of this hurricane. And there's some bands up here that are trying to form again. Again, you probably saw that on the infrared, a big burst of convection, as that is more of a later pass compared to when this one was taken. But again, you can see the structure of this thing kind of fell apart as the outflow and the influence from the northerly shear kind of tore apart Jose. Again, it's still a hurricane, it's still spinning, but it's kind of struggling to continue to feed itself and to try and become anything stronger. But again, that will change with time as Irma again slowly dies out and eventually moves north and becomes and Jose gets into a more favorable environment just a little bit. Now the biggest question that we've been kind of figuring out now is where is this hurricane going to go over the next few days, and that's kind of becoming a more interesting trend as time goes on. If you look at the forecast, this is for Thursday morning, the early morning hours. Again, you can see Irma on the eastern seaboard, and you have a large trough in the middle of the Atlantic, and over Jose you have a very weak steering pattern associated with this ridge, so it's pretty much going to stall out for the next few days and going to meander just east of the Bahamas. But once Irma kind of kicks out and it kind of fades away, this ridge would dominate, and again you can see the large ridge that's over the Midwest right now. That will kind of chew apart Irma as Irma kind of spins down, and you're going to get a larger scale ridge developing over Jose, which will allow it to begin steering further a little bit to the west over time. If we go forward in time on the GFS, you can kind of see that happening as Irma becomes kind of like a short wave and kind of dies out on its own. Doesn't really have enough kick with it to kind of kick out Jose at all. So now a large-scale ridge will develop over Jose. So again, the steering pattern begins to shift Jose slightly, ever so slightly more towards the west over time. So now the bigger question is going to be, is this thing going to affect the United States? And again, we really don't know that at this time. If you go forward ahead, there you will have a stronger trough that was in the west that you saw maybe earlier, and I'll show that a little bit later. There's a trough that will develop over the northern part of Canada that will, again, this is still 162 hours out. So on this run of the model, and this is valid for around 2 p.m. on Monday, the hurricane still is going to try and stay offshore with the ever so slight influence of this trough in Canada, just barely keeping this thing off the coast. But again, there's a lot of variables that can change with this thing. And again, this is a forecast for 162 hours out. So we're talking about Monday afternoon, and a lot of things can change. This ridge could be much stronger. this trough could maybe just not even be that strong at all and just kind of flatline its way up into further north in Canada. But I'll show you that right now on the other models guidance. So you can see any areas that are in the oranges and the reds, think of that as like high pressure, and anything that is in the bluer shades, that is like a low pressure system. You can think of it like that for simpler terms. So this is valid for Friday morning. Again, you can see the large ridge that is to the north of Jose. That's kind of blocking it for trying to get out to sea. It's kind of the same thing with what happened with Irma. The high pressure prevented it from trying to get curved out. So you can kind of see what's going on now is you have a trough that's going to try and dig into the western half of the United States, and that actually will probably be the main player on whether or not Jose is going to get closer to the United States, or be more of a sea storm and just barely miss the entire eastern seaboard. If we go forward in time, you can see the ridge that's out there on the west coast. So we follow that along. It digs into the west coast. This ridge on the east coast dominates over Jose, so Jose starts tracking a little bit further to the coast. And then if we go forward in time, that trough that was in the west coast kind of gets placed up in northern Canada and kind of has lost its punch to it. So this is going to be the big question going into next week. Again, this is still 162 hours out, valid for Monday afternoon. A lot of things can change with this thing, but if you go by the current model forecast, you got a large-scale ridge in this thing developing over Jose, so that thing is going to slightly try and keep Jose further and closer to the coast with time, but this trough just might dig in just enough to keep this thing kicked out to sea. But again, we don't really know that, and it's again 162 hours out. That's 6 days later, so we don't really know. And these things, these models and these forecasts change with time as they get more data, and the confidence increases, especially within 3 to 4 days is when you start getting a better handle on these things. But we'll just have to see with time. I'm going to quickly show you the trends over the last few runs of the GFS, valid for that same time Monday afternoon. Again, you can see as initialized, the storm was off the Carolina coast, and then the models over the last 24 to 48 hours want to push this thing further into the Carolinas off Cape Hatteras, and then the last recent couple runs of the GFS has started to push this thing further off the coast again. So is this a trend, or is this thing just the models wiggling back and forth between each solution? That is something that we're going to have to see. Again, that is still 162 hours out. That's still 6 days away. That is a long time to look at this thing, and it's really not going to go anywhere. As you can see, the ensembles, this thing is going to pinwheel again from the high pressure that will build up to its north. It will prevent this thing from even going any further north, and it will pinwheel back with the influence of the ridge. And again, it's how strong is that ridge going to be will keep this thing either closer to the coast, or is that trough that we saw earlier in the west coast, is that going to punch in a lot deeper and faster to kick this thing offshore as some of these ensembles do. But we've always seen with these ensembles, they are really bad at predicting stuff beyond even 4 days, as even we saw that with Irma, especially how that track starts shifting west with time. Even within 2 to 3 days, it starts shifting west with time. So don't take this as verbatim. This is just what the center and what they think is the center is going to do. But again, there's a lot of variables at play here. So briefly, to wrap this thing up, current National Hurricane Center still has a sustained hurricane at 100 miles per hour. So this thing is still a pretty strong hurricane regardless. But it still keeps it as a hurricane. Again, you can't rule out this thing strengthening as the influence of Irma kind of fades this thing away, and it starts getting into these warmer waters. But if it still sits over this area for a few days, it could weaken it just a little bit as it upwells a little bit more cooler water underneath it. But you can still see it's a very tiny little system. Like the core of the hurricane winds are barely like 15 miles away from the center. But again, you're going to pinwheel around from the influence of the high. But again, once we get past Friday, we should have a better grasp, especially even maybe on Thursday, we'll have a better grasp on where this thing's going to go. Again, you can see how spread that cone is after 5 days, because we really don't know what's going to happen with this thing. And again, we have plenty of time to look at this thing don't really think about preparations, or if you're in the North Carolina coast, don't even think about evacuating or anything crazy like that. That's still way too far away. We give it at least until Thursday to start figuring what you're gonna do and stuff like that. But we'll keep an eye on that. Thanks for watching on this. Keep you posted.